Hi, I'm Mike Lamneck. It's Music Meanderings. Today we're going to talk about records that have sold for the most amount of money. And as might not be surprising to you, most of them are Beatles albums, with one exception being an Elvis Presley album. And actually, the album that has sold for the absolute most is not a rock album at all. We'll talk about that coming up. Take a look now at number 5 on our list of albums that have sold for the most amount of money, and that is the Beatles, Yesterday and Today, known as the infamous Butcher cover. What were they thinking, right? The infamous album cover, the Butcher cover with John, Paul, George, and Ringo draped in dismembered doll parts and pieces of meat. Yeah, I think this was the drug phase of the Beatles. What gets me is somebody looked at that album cover and said, yeah, that's good. Let's go ahead and print that. But wiser minds prevailed shortly, of course, and they pulled that album from the stores. And right now, a mint edition sealed copy became the most expensive copy of the record ever sold in history when it fetched $125,000 in February 2013. The Butcher cover, it's available in different states as they classify them. If you have one that has had the sticker taken off, it's worth a certain amount of money. I think the one state of the album cover that is worth the most is if you have one that just has the corner peeled back a little bit, but still has the sticker on it. Of course, worth even more than that is a sealed copy. Again, that sold in February 2013 for $125,000. Well, not officially a Beatles album, but certainly Beatles related. At number 4, it's John Lennon and Yoko Ono and their Double Fantasy album. The album that was recorded right before his tragic death and released posthumously, $150,000. The tragic detail that makes this album so pricey is the fact that it had been signed by Lennon to his own assassin, Mark Chapman, just hours before his death on December 8th, 1980. The album was later found in Chapman's possession and sold for $150,000 in 1999. Well, back to the Beatles we go for number 3 in the priciest albums ever sold. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, signed by all 4 Beatles. Mono version with the black Parlophone label. Now, if one signature, of course, can dramatically increase the value of a record, just imagine what 4 can do. In the case of this record, sold at an auction 2013 to a buyer from Midwest in America, is the only detail we have there. The auctioneers had estimated a sale in the region of $30,000 and were stunned when a bidding war prevailed, and the album ended up fetching $290,000 and breaking the record for a copy of that 1967 record. Well, in our discussion of records that have sold for the most amount of money, we're going to break from the Beatles for one as we move to Elvis. In fact, this wasn't an album, this was a single, My Happiness, sold for $300,000 to Jack White of White Stripes fame. Of course, if you know anything about him, you know he's a huge vintage gear and vinyl collector and even has his own record label, Third Man, which specializes in vintage recording techniques and unusual vinyl releases. He bought the test pressing, the acetate, of Elvis's first ever recording at an auction in December 2015. Using it to make a limited edition facsimile that he released through Third Man Records, complete with all the pops and scratches and even a plain brown paper bag as a sleeve, because, as Jack White said, that's what Elvis would have walked out of Sun Records with. And at number one on our survey of albums that have sold for the most amount of money, it's back to the Beatles. The Beatles' White Album. $790,000 is what was paid for that. What made it so pricey? Well, Beatles drummer Ringo Starr had the very first copy of the band's self-titled double album from 1968. And it was printed with the serial number in the sequence and bears the number, I don't know how many zeros, a lot of zeros, and then 1. He eventually sold his copy at an auction in the U.S. for $790,000 in December 2015 to an unnamed buyer, and along with his famous Ludwig drum kit, which was bought by Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay for $2.2 million. And by far the most paid for any album, again, breaking away from rock and going into rap for this, but it certainly deserves mentioning just based on the amount of money it was sold for. Wu-Tang Clan and Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. $2 million is what that record sold for. By far the most expensive sold album ever, 2015. What makes it so pricey? Well, there's only one of this record in existence, and it comes with a contract that stipulates that the buyer may not attempt to sell or make money from the record for 100 years, although the owner can release the album for free if he wishes to someone else. The buyer turned out to be a controversial pharmaceuticals company CEO who was convicted for securities fraud and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The LP then was confiscated by the feds, and it's believed that they still have it in their possession. Well, there you go. Do you have any albums in your collection that are worth a lot of money? These days, it's hard to just find them if you're shopping for records in a used record store because, of course, due to the internet, people can just get on there and see what these records are worth. You might pick one up at a garage sale, perhaps a thrift shop, or maybe an estate sale, something like that. Please comment below and subscribe. This has been Music Meanderings.